Ramon Marmolejos is the executive director and co-founder of Emzingo Group. Emzingo Group that is bringing the leadership, responsible leadership program to students around the world. Ramon was working previously for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation. He graduated from Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and he completed an international MBA from IE Business School in Madrid, in Spain. Ramon, together with Antoine Lepet, it is my pleasure to welcome you in this call, in the conference, and I would like to give room to you right now. Please tell us more about your project.
Sure. Thanks, Rafael. Thanks, Antoine. Hello, everyone. My name is Ramon Marmolejos. I'm the Executive Director for Emzingo Group. Emzingo Group is a hybrid leadership and social development company. We take business leaders and we match them with social impact projects around the world, and we combine that with an action learning model that's focused around responsible leadership and what we think are the key competencies for responsible leaders around the world. Our work really is focused on working with social enterprises and nonprofit organizations in emerging markets. Right now we're working in South Africa and in Peru. And what I wanted to focus on is some of the work actually that I did previously to creating Emzingo while I was working with Monitor Group, which is a consultancy now a part of Deloitte globally. And we had done work with evaluating social enterprises in Africa. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we did with Monitor Group, talk a little bit about some of the business models that were highlighted as part of their report, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Emzingo Group and what we're doing to promote responsible leadership and to promote social entrepreneurship and innovation around the world. So, Rafael, can I just start with the presentation then?
Yeah, please, Ramon, tell us about your work. We'll be listening.
Right. So, really quickly, what I want to do is talk about the Monitor study that was conducted with work that was done from 2008 to 2010, which resulted in a breakthrough report called Promise and Progress. And really, it looked at evaluating social enterprise models that fit these three criteria, right? So Monitor was looking to find enterprises that were scalable so that they could reach a critical mass of people at the base of the pyramid, that were commercially viable. So if not profitable, at least they have the ability to sustain themselves from an operating standpoint so that they don't depend solely on donor funding. And then they looked at companies that had direct social benefits for the base of the pyramid, right? What made this important was that most studies had done, at this point, anecdotal work around enterprises that were fitting this criteria, but no study had really focused on the business models that worked around social entrepreneurship. And so Monitor really wanted to unpack that. And so they evaluated something like 460 enterprises across 10 different countries in Africa to understand what are the models that work in the African context and what are the lessons that can be learned for future social entrepreneurs that are looking to create products and services for the base of the pyramid. So that's the context of the report. Now, what were some of the things that came up? So models that work, there were three that were proven given the analysis, and again, this was conducted through interviews, focus groups, and also looking at operational analysis of all these enterprises. What we found is that there are three models that were particularly very good at those three areas, right? So smallholder farmer aggregator model. So this is a model where you take a smallholder farmer and you actually provide a lot of the services which it can across the value chain for that smallholder farmer in order to get their products to a broader market. There's also this idea of improved informal shop distribution models. So taking informal shops that existed in Africa as a distribution platform for new products and services. And then private vocational training colleges, given the need for vocational training and given the need for education in a lot of these countries, there are low-cost private vocational models that work very well and were very profitable as well. So I'm just going to get into some of these models. So the smallholder farmer aggregator model, what were some of the benefits and what were some of the really important parts of that business model? One, they provided the essential inputs such as seeds and fertilizers for their farmers. They also had produce services such as sorting, drying, and storing, right? So they created and put in sort of these high-value activities that really was not at the capacity for these smallholder farmers, but really made a big difference in creating value into that product and then the ability to market to a larger audience. They also provided transport services to lower transportation costs, because that's a big, big issue when it comes to agriculture in Africa. They also provided credit accessibility, understanding that farmers have really uneven cash flow given the seasonality of agriculture and farming. That also protected the farmer against droughts and other catastrophic events. They also provided on-delivery payment in cash. So this was an important piece as well, so that the farmer could now kind of plan ahead, knowing that they had a secure buyer for their product, right? So instead of thinking that they would potentially not have secure or stable buyers for the products. And essentially this model changes completely what we think about farmer models in Africa, right? So if you think about the typical market in Africa is really where most farmers go to, right? And they can sell their product, but again, have insecure source of income and that's inconsistent, could not protect themselves against catastrophic events, and could not have access to these higher value services. And so on the left, you see sort of the degree of intermediation of a lot of these smallholder farmer aggregator models. And across the 40 agriculture initiatives that we studied in Africa, there were actually more than 500,000 small farmers involved. And what was shown was that the income of these farmers increased something between 25 to 40%. So you can imagine that has a huge impact for these farmers that typically just have a couple of acres of land. Okay, so that's one model that was very successful. Another model was this idea of improved informal shops, and the key parts of that model were leveraging existing retail channels, right? So informal shops are a very big part of African society in terms of getting their products in the hands of the base of the pyramid. So these informal shops that were typically run out of people's homes or created, in a major maybe street of town, were already in existence, and so we found that innovative entrepreneurs use those retail channels, those informal shops as a key distribution channel, as opposed to creating kind of typical or traditional retail stores in urban areas. Right? So this is more found in smaller townships, found in smaller villages as well. They also provided training and equipment for channel participants, right? So they upskilled a lot of these informal shop owners, and then they provided any necessary equipment, made it very easy to use as well, since a lot of these shop owners may not have formal education. They also had, they delineated multiple distinct roles in the route to market, right? So they found different ways for the customer to access the product. They also selectively engaged existing retailers, right? So they made sure that they understood which informal shops would be most effective for the target market that they were looking for. And then actively stimulating demand. So a lot of times people don't realize that in the base of the pyramid, so it's actually very difficult to provide services because a lot of times the customer doesn't even know that they need those services. And so a big part of that was using informal shops to train the customer around this new service or product that's being provided and stimulating that demand. So on the left you have an example here of actually the Green World model by Bayer. People know it's a major German company. Now, and in particular, their Bayer Crop Science division created this model where they actually sold their products to farmers in order to increase their outputs. And so that Bayer Crop Science used these key dealers as wholesalers, as you can see there. Then that was pushed to their retailers that were used as agents, and then finally to their local farmers. Right. So again, it really created a lot of, it unleashed a lot of demand within the value chain, and it was able, and Bayer as a big company were able to use these kiosks in order to distribute their products to local farmers. And so these stores actually became consultancy centers for local farmers, and these agents then provided these products and distributed their marketing as well. And they did this through a few ways, as you see there: demonstration days, radio advertisements, and also promotion of the Green World shops as well. And the other model that was particularly very successful was the idea of private vocational training colleges. So this is a big issue because a large part of the population is unskilled and uneducated, have very little access to high-quality education, especially tertiary education. And so you have vast amounts of people that are not just unemployed, but they're unemployable because they lack those skills. And so this creates a very big need for not necessarily formalized university education, but also vocational training for lower skilled jobs. And so these private vocational training colleges, a big part of their model was minimizing costs through para-skilling instructors. So they created training programs for their instructors that were adhered to, standardized courses, which was very important as well, specialization in certain sectors and industries, and also location was very important. Right? So location that was easily accessible to people living in rural or smaller villages. They also had matching payment terms to student cash flow, so that was very important. So they wanted to make sure that they understood that these students had inconsistent cash flow and that they were flexible in providing payment plans. They wanted to diversify their customer base, and this is something that happened across different models. I think understanding that you should have a mix of both maybe higher end and lower end customer models that have different price points and ability to pay in order to diversify risk against people who defaulted on some of these education loans. And then also offering value-added services beyond just courses, such as direct work experience that help in work placement, and then also ongoing training. And as you see there, you see some of the revenue drivers for these FET models. And again, a lot of, and at the bottom there you see 4 examples specifically from South Africa in Edufix, Sululu, BT, and JEPI. Now there were also some models to watch moving forward. Mobile-enabled business models, last-mile infrastructure that, for both energy and water, and direct sales agent networks. So in terms of mobile-enabled business models, the major areas for that model was around remote delivery of information and transactions via mobile application, whether that's SMS or voice. And again, this is particularly important. These mobile-enabled business models are particularly successful in Africa because of, one, the extremely high penetration of mobile phone usage, and two, because a lot of the population live in very spread out kind of in territories, right? So you have not as many people living in urban cities as compared to, say, Southeast Asia or Latin America. And so you had people that that lived in rural areas but did not have access to a lot of these services and used their cell phone as a way to get access, right? Another big part of the mobile-enabled business models is multiple payment platforms that included monthly subscriptions, per transaction charges, or bundling options. So that providing those different kinds of options is very important for the base of the pyramid client. They also did direct marketing to the base of the pyramid to encourage mass adoption. So that's an important part of this, to get critical mass. Involvement of trusted intermediaries such as health workers, agro dealers, or agents in order to increase adoption rates as well. And I think the most successful case of this is M-Pesa, based in Kenya. Right? So they have over 6 million users. They provide financial services through SMS, through an SMS platform. And that's now become the standard and really the most innovative mobile application for financial services. And I think one of the most innovative models in the world. You also have last mile infrastructure. And clearly this is a big need, right? So that last mile of distribution of services for people that live in rural areas outside of urban centers becomes a big issue, especially in Africa, again, where the population is very much spread out over a large geography. So getting access to basic services like energy and water becomes very difficult when you don't have built-in grids or infrastructure that you would find in urban areas. So big parts of this model, you have community-level assets that rely on small-scale energy generation, for example, solar, diesel, hydro, and hybrids, and equipment with limited connection capacity. You have direct individual household distribution and metering models as well. Differential pricing, right? So you have multiple package offerings depending on the kind of usage. You have community-run and privately operated models. You have soft funding to cover upfront costs. That's an important part of these models because there is an upfront cost, especially to the user. And you have regulated operations depending on the geography. And so you see the impact that these microgrid models can have compared to other sources of energy, right? So in Kenya and Tanzania, as you see there, when you compare electricity from microgrids, much more cost-effective than using paraffin, which is used in lamps or torches as well, right? So again, it becomes a big savings for people that, again, already have very little disposable income. So if you can have that amount of savings, it can have a huge impact. Then finally, you have this direct sales agent network. So this is another model that's worked very well. So you have dedicated all-in-one direct sales agents that sort of do it all. You have wholesale purchase of goods from the manufacturer. That's an important component of this model. You have a mixed basket of products. You also provide extensive coaching, supervision, and training for these agents. Doorstep delivery tends to be very important. And then you provide access to credit for buyers as well in order to stimulate demand. And here on the left, you have an example of some of these models. So again, you have to think about one important component is also teaching and education of the customer, right? And so products, depending on where they sit on this matrix, again, by degree of customer education required, and also retailer agent model margin. So again, we found that the most profitable, as you see there, are in the on the right quadrant. The most profitable kinds of products that could be used for this direct sales agent network model are there. And and again, these agent networks are important because this combats the problem of not having to create retail outlets in places that are inaccessible. So overall lessons from the study, right? So you want to leverage informality in Africa, so that's an important part. There's a formal market, but a very large informal market, as opposed to just working through the formal market. The report basically is telling entrepreneurs to leverage that informality. Use trusted intermediaries. That's very important because those suppliers, vendors, partners become a very big part of your ability to execute. Stimulate demand where possible, either through education or looking at getting anchor buyers. Manage transport costs. So realize that base of the pyramid has very large transport costs. Sell services and bundles, not just products. So that diversifies your risk, so that you have a higher possibility of long-term viability for an enterprise. You also want to secure anchor buyers where possible. That creates large potential for growth when you have large anchor buyers. You want to engage in partnerships whenever possible, and you want to use the government as well. The government can act as an anchor buyer. It could also act as a major resource in research and development, as well as training. So those are kind of the major lessons. And here you have sort of the different ways to deliver social impact at scale. So there are three ways, really. You want to either innovate and grow, so looking at a business model and combining all those elements and drive that business model to success. So you want to sort of, based on that innovation, look to grow. Then you have this idea of replication and dissemination. So looking to franchise a particular business model and look to growth as through replication, and then leverage and improve. Right. So look at upgrading sectors that are already at scale, but typically informal and inefficient. Right? So think about removing some of those barriers, and think about how you can improve some of those informal markets. Okay, so those are kind of lessons from the Monitor study, and the Promise and Progress report is available on their website, and if anybody else is interested, I can also send that to the participants directly. Now, a little bit about Emzingo. So Emzingo is, our mission is people development through social impact. Right? We're looking to inspire responsible leadership, prepare individuals to address global challenges, and connect the business to the citizen sector. Really what we do is provide an action learning model for our participants to then provide technical assistance to these social enterprises and nonprofit organizations in rapidly emerging economies. And we find that this is important because responsible leadership is important, right? We know that the crisis that we're going through is one, I think, in part because of lack of values. And so Emzingo is very much a mission-driven and values-based organization where we try to work with participants to change the way we think about these business models and to be much more inclusive of the way we define value, not just financial value, but social value, environmental value, and this idea of the triple bottom line. So those are the values that we instill through our program of action learning and placing participants on these projects to really deal with mission-critical issues. And so what drives Emzingo? There are a few things that drive Emzingo. I think one is the big demand from our participants to do good work. Right? So people want to provide their technical expertise to these organizations, not just give away free money. I also think one big thing that's driving Emzingo is the need for a new view of the way we think about leadership education and business education in general. So we have to understand that leadership cannot be taught in a classroom. It has to be taught in the field and through practice. And so that's a big component of Emzingo. And then another big part is that we have to deal with these problems in a responsible way. So when we think about the financial crisis that we're going through, I think it is because there is a lack of responsible leadership on the part of people making those decisions. And so you really can't change the world and you can't change systems until you change decision makers and the way they look at the world. And so that's a big, big component of what we do at Emzingo. Okay, so just I guess I'll open it up to Rafael or anybody else that may have any questions.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Ramon, for this presentation and lesson about social business models. Great to learn about this. At the same time, I really appreciate to have this call at the end with you because that conference is focusing on personalities, like how people see opportunities in the problems. And then basically, what is your organization doing? It's trying to kind of teach responsible leadership. Try to, exactly that's what we are showing, prepare the mindset of the people. So that's very important for us. And there is a question coming from community. How can we take the African lessons from the monitor study worldwide? What is applicable elsewhere and what is different?
Yeah, good question. I think the big lessons from the monitor study, as I mentioned there, one is that when I did a lot of these interviews and worked with some of these enterprises, is that you want to have a deep understanding of your client, right? And I think for people that want to do this kind of work, one of the big parts of this is being able to understand who are you serving. And again, you cannot do this. You cannot think about these problems unless you are on the ground and understand very deeply what are the issues that are facing these communities, right? So that means you have to either have deep knowledge somehow or have lived there, or you're looking to innovate and you're on the ground. And that's one big thing that I would tell people is that it's one thing to create business plans from 1,500 miles away, but you want to be on the ground as much as possible and get feedback from your customer base. And that's applicable in Africa, or India, or anywhere you go, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is you want to understand that you want to create models that meet these communities where they are. So what do I mean by that? You want to meet them where they are, understand what are the assets that they have. So you want to have an assets-based approach that's human-centered. So you don't want to go into these communities and sort of say, oh, well, they don't have this, they're missing this distribution, they don't have the education to understand our products or services. You want to understand who you're dealing with, right? And you want to create something that's customized to that customer. And I think the third thing that is really important to realize is that you want to always understand that if you want to take a market-based approach to these solutions, you have to be mindful of your cash. You're right, cash is king in any model, and if you want to look at social enterprises, you have to understand how you're going to deal with consistent cash flow, and become innovative around that, and create innovative models that extracts value. And I think the assumption is too many times that these populations will not pay high prices for services, when in fact all they want is a quality access to these services and products. And so I'll give you an example. Bridge International Academy, based in Kenya, have a really innovative model to provide primary education through a franchise model, low-cost private education model. And the idea is that they're combating free education, right, in Kenya. But the issue is that free education is poor quality, inaccessible, and relatively expensive because these people need to then give these children clothing, food, transportation, all that. So what Bridge International said is, let me turn this idea of private education on its head. So when you think about private education, you might think, oh, it's expensive, you can only pay on a per term or per annual basis, and it's only for the upper class. Well, the founder of Bridge International decided, no, I want to provide low cost, no frills, kind of school-in-a-box concept. And so what did he do? He created a very standardized curriculum. He upskilled really decent teachers. He didn't have to get amazing teachers, but he upskilled decent teachers and made sure that they kept to a curriculum. He also provided a very innovative payment model where farmers and daily workers get paid every day. So he actually created a program where parents would pay on a daily basis, not on a monthly or semester or yearly basis, but on a daily basis. They would pay 7 cedi, which is the equivalent of something like $2 or $3. And that included books, that included transportation, that included foods and uniforms for the student. And so when a parent is comparing free education that's low quality and relatively expensive to this private education model, all of a sudden it becomes very attractive, right? So that's an example of what I'm talking about. So don't be afraid of creating models that really provide high value, but also combat the freebie model that people are used to.
Exactly. So the importance that we have already learned in the previous sessions, the importance of being flexible and trying to create out-of-the-box ideas that create social impact at the end. There is a question actually coming from Menno. Can't join because of some internet issues, but he managed to send the question. You said often the customer doesn't even know they need the product. How do you reconcile that with Joban lessons of the importance of listening to those in need rather than telling them what they need?
You broke up there in the beginning, Rafael. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. You said often the customer doesn't even know they need the product.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that with Joban's lessons, our previous speaker, of the importance of listening to those in need rather than telling them what they need?
That's a good point. So when I talk about, sometimes they don't know that they need the service, I think it's more around creating this idea of why the product is useful to them, right? And so when I say that, I don't mean you shouldn't listen, right? So I think at the heart of this is listening to what the customer needs, but sometimes it's not necessarily just by asking them. I think you need to observe. You need to really be embedded in these communities and observe, their habits and say, okay, well, that's, this is an issue, whatever it is. So, I'll give you an example. The cook stove models, for example, have this issue, right? So cook stoves, typically, when you look at these rural communities, they use firewood to cook. And now what's become very popular are these cook stove models that are sold through agent distributions, typically, in these communities. Now, this is a situation where you have to change habits. And so when you talk to somebody who is used to a particular habit, and you say, hey, you use firewood right now, would you like to use a cook stove model? Mm-hmm. They're probably going to say no. Right? They're going to probably say, 1, status quo, 2, lack of information. They don't see the benefit. So that's why, what I find are some of the most interesting models are the ones that use these agents as tools to educate. Right? So these agents in some of these cook stove models are actually go into people's homes and educate them around why this is important and what are the benefits in terms of cost reduction, in terms of health. A lot of times People don't realize that children get burned in a lot of these communities because of firewood or other materials that are used to create these fires. But when you talk through and you actually educate the customer, all of a sudden they become engaged, and especially if you use people that they respect, community elders or health workers, and again that becomes a really good way to engage your customers. So that's what I mean by that. So it's not necessarily that you have to give them something that they don't want. You have to be very mindful of what are their needs, even if they explicitly communicated them or not, and then provide something that really is attractive and sort of really customized.
Become them aware about the solutions, yes, that exist that they might not know.
Yeah.
Great. Antoine, would you like to ask any questions?
Yes, actually, Ramon, you spoke about that cash was king for social business, and that you need some cash in order to sustain yourself. And can you tell us from your point of view for Emzingo, what is exactly like the business model behind connecting leaders and social businesses?
Yeah. Good question. So we are currently working with business schools around Europe and the U.S., and we focus on taking their students and matching them with these social impact projects. Okay, and so the way it works is essentially the business school takes up a large part of the cost of the program, and the student takes up some of that. And what we find is that business schools essentially see us as a vendor that kind of and they can outsource a really innovative international immersion project. And why is this important for business schools? Well, because I think they realize that things are changing. I think they realize that there's a higher demand for these kinds of projects from their students. I think that they realize that they don't have the capacity to create these projects on the field, and that the students want more field-based work outside of the classroom. So I think we fulfill those needs. Where I see the most impact for Emzingo is working with the companies, and that's where the stage that we're working on right now is working with global companies to match their employees, high potential employees, with these kinds of projects around the world. Now, why would companies do this, and why would they cover the cost of a participant to go through the program? I think there are a few reasons, right? I think companies want to understand how do they develop their next, their pipeline of leaders, responsible leaders. I think that's a big part of it. I think they want to use these kinds of programs as recruitment and retention tools for people. I think companies are realizing that the newer generation wants to have meaning behind their work, and unfortunately they can't provide that on their own. And so I think this program does that. I think they also want to understand how do they innovate from the base of the pyramid. So these countries are also the economies that will be the future markets for, and already are the markets for, these companies. And so I think companies are realizing we need to pay attention to these rapidly emerging economies. And then third, I think companies are feeling the pressure to do CSR in a much more meaningful way. So that companies need to move beyond just writing checks and creating glossy brochures, but they have to engage with civil society in a meaningful way, because there are more touch points between business and society than ever before. And so there are bigger demands on companies in the way they represent themselves in a way that's much more responsible and much more focused on this triple bottom line. And so I think we at Emzingo provide that value, and that's why we've always been a for-profit from the beginning. We're registered as an LLC in the U.S. because I think we know that we have value in the work that we do, and we provide that value, and I think we put a price on that value. And so I think that's why I think it's important to realize that, because if there's always the big debate for a lot of organizations: do we go nonprofit at first or for-profit? And I think you have to really have a deep conversation up front to think about what model works for you.
It's very interesting. And one of our objectives at Sensation, and also with the SENS24 conference, is really to connect people, also NGOs, companies, social entrepreneurs, students. And you said basically you are matching business leaders with different social projects. Can you tell us a little bit more how you do that? How you match the different people and the companies together? And also, how you select these business leaders, and how social companies can apply. So it's 3 questions in one. I'm sorry, but
repeat those 3 again. Sorry.
So how do you match business leaders with projects?
Mm-hmm.
Then how do you select the business leaders?
Yeah.
And how can social companies can apply to the program?
Great. Thanks. So for one, so how do we match? Right now, we working with students. We look to match students based on their skill set, right? So we want to look at their experience. We want to look at what are their professional interests, and then we look to understand what kind of work would be most beneficial for these organizations. And what we look at in terms on the organization side, we look at organizations that are, have a strong leadership that's committed to this kind of initiative, that have the absorptive capacity to take on a lot of the recommendations that the participants will create. And so then we look at, once we select students to participate in organizations, then we match them based, again, on their experience, on their profile, and also the student's interest, right? So the participant actually gets to rank the organization or project that they want to work with, and we take that into consideration. We're a big proponent that you should have passion for the work that you're doing, and so a big part of it is not just your experience, but do you have an affinity to the project? And so we create the matching based on that. The way we select students is through an interview process. So typically we create partnerships with these schools that then subsidize the program for students to participate. We go through an application process whereby we do a one-on-one interview, and we also do a group interview to understand how they work in a group dynamic. And then when we think about selecting these social enterprises, again, we look at the leadership, we look at their absorptive capacity, we look at creating mission-critical projects. We're actually in the process of developing a really, what I think is cutting-edge kind of metrics and evaluation tool that can help us evaluate, create a diagnostic of these organizations and understand what are their biggest needs in order to scope projects that are most impactful. When we work with companies, it's a bit of a different mix. And so with global companies instead of schools, we're looking at companies and selecting companies based on their sort of how innovative they are, how much do they develop their employees, and how important CSR is to their operation. When we work with these companies, we're looking to match them with programs and projects that are directly tied to their business strategy, right? So I think the business case for this is super important. I think this is a big lesson as well. You have to have a business case or else companies won't care. Companies won't do this because it's a feel-good thing to do. They will do this because there's a business reason to do this. And so when we work for Pepsi, for example, with Pepsi, I'm speaking with them and saying, okay, so Pepsi, a big issue for Pepsi is water security. Water security is important for Pepsi because without water, there's no Pepsi. Right? To be clear. And what's interesting is that water security is an issue in the next 10 years, right? For a band of countries around the world that are also happen to be very important emerging markets for Pepsi. And so Pepsi would love to work with nonprofit social enterprises, NGOs that are focused around water security in these communities. And so the idea would be to have Pepsi employees then be matched with these NGOs on the ground, bring their technical expertise, and it's a win-win, right? So Pepsi gets to work in securing their water security. They get to have their employees work on these really amazing projects. Their employees get pumped from just having this experience from a developmental standpoint, a professional standpoint, and then the organizations benefit from the expertise that Pepsi brings. So I think that's how we look to match. I think it's based on clarity of roles and interests, but also the business case behind it.
Okay, thank you. So I encourage any students to apply to the Emzingo program, and also some social entrepreneurs with a project and business case that can invest companies.
Yes.
And one point also is like you spoke about you can't do a VP at like 1,000 miles away. So you have to be literally on the last mile, like close to your customers and close to the suppliers, the stakeholders.
That's right.
And a lot of people actually that we interviewed today, in the last 24 hours, they told us like they really intensively use partnership in order to develop their solution. And you say in your presentation at one point, but basically you need to have trusted intermediaries.
That's right.
How can you know if I'm a social entrepreneur, I want to create, I have an idea, I want to go to Africa, and I know which type of partner I need? How can I be sure that I can trust them? What can I put in place? What can I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me tell you, that's hard to do. I think one of the things that I would say is, again, you establish a lot of these relationships sometimes virtually, but I would encourage everyone, and in places like Africa, and I think it's the same in many geographies, you create trust through those relationships, and so you need to be on the ground. Again, you cannot manage this stuff away from who you want to serve. So part of it is you want to really engage in these communities directly. Then you want to leverage your networks wherever you can. That really helps. And so that's one thing that happened in our case. We already had some networks when we established ourselves in South Africa. But I think we also did our research, right? And so we identified organizations that become big players and intermediaries in the space. And in particular for us, Ashoka became a big intermediary for us. Endeavor is another one that becomes a big intermediary for us. Some impact investors. We work with local universities as for our partners as well. So like in South Africa, we work with Wits University and Gibbs. We worked with subject matter experts as well. And so when you create and identify the ecosystem that you're working in, all of a sudden those conversations lead to sort of their suggestions, right? So you don't want to create the work for yourself. You want to leverage the local experts that are on the ground, that have created these relationships, that identify these organizations already, that can tell you with certainty, hey, you should look at this organization, or you should speak with this person. And what I find is that people are really open to that. And so that's what I would say is do your homework, identify those organizations that play a very important intermediary role, that are proven, right? So they're, kind of already have a reputation and a track record, and then leverage those people to get embedded into these communities, and then that they can identify people that become trusted part of your network, and then just work with them. And sometimes we've done really well, and we've been fortunate, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And so you want to identify the people that work well and keep them in your network, and then if it doesn't work, you want to move on. You want to cut your loss and also minimize your risk exposure working with an untrusted intermediary.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ramon, for all the answers to the questions. We'll have to slowly finish since we have only 24 hours today.
Only 24.
Exactly. It was a pleasure again to listen to you and to learn about models, and I believe that this presentation served our audience also. We will try to post the information about the articles you set on the website so that they might also get interested.
Perfect.
One more question quickly, if we can, just before we finish. We have four more minutes, so we are going to use the whole time. Mm-hmm. You speak in your last answer about impact investors, and we didn't speak so much about financing like these social businesses. Do you know if the companies like social enterprise are bootstrapping their efforts, or they have access to external capital? And if external capital, can you tell us a bit more about these impact investors? How do they work?
Yeah, great question. So we also did a big analysis around impact investing and the role that impact investing can play for social entrepreneurs. What we find is that most of these social enterprises really are kind of bootstrapping, right? And they're gaining grants as well from outside sort of foundations and philanthropists. as a way to start up. They're using a lot of their own capital. They're using sometimes government funding as well, or government contracts. But we find that the real opportunity is with impact investors, and we know that impact investors. The big issue that we find with impact investors is right now is that there's a mix. There's a mismatch of funding and expectation, and that's one big thing to realize. Is that social entrepreneurs cannot start their companies thinking that impact investors will immediately kind of be attracted to them. And I think it's partly the evolutionary cycle of an organization. You know, impact investors, and this is as a sector, only started maybe 10 years ago. And the big issue is that impact investors kind of have too much of, they range between finance first versus social first impact investors. And what we find with a lot of these impact investors, they have this kind of fund mentality, and they want high growth, scalable models that allow for easy exit of their investments. But meanwhile, these entrepreneurs need more patient capital that's much more long-term and in smaller chunks than impact investors are willing to provide. And so what we find is that, when we think about different tiers of organizations, there's a lot of, let's say, small loans available, microfinancing available at the very bottom level. These impact investors are coming in at the very top level, providing multi-million-dollar funds, but are looking for investments of $250,000 and above, which is very difficult for a startup, obviously, to scale and to absorb that kind of cash and provide the return that they expect. And so what Monitor found is that there's a missing middle, this missing middle of entrepreneurs that are looking to grow but don't have access to the cash at that middle tier of maybe $25,000 to $200,000 of investment. And in part it's because impact investors have not yet figured out a model that disseminates that capital in an efficient and effective way. Right, so due diligence has its own cost. Pipeline of leads has its cost, and also just the cost of maintaining a fund with really talented people. That has a cost, and so impact investing has not yet found a way to address and provide capital to this missing middle, and that becomes an issue. And I think the work that Rockefeller is doing, the work J.P. Morgan is doing, is trying to deal with some of that. But I also think that impact investors need to change the way their perspective and the way they think about this. And from an entrepreneur standpoint, I would say, look at other sources of funding early on, because they're not going to qualify for impact investors until much further in the road. And that they also have to realize that they have to have a proven concept with long-term cash flow provability before impact investors are going to look at them, and they also need to scale at a certain size because of, again, the requirements that impact investors are looking for. So it's not for everyone, but for those organizations that are looking to scale and have the model, it could work very well.
So what we need is not for the social entrepreneurship world, but business angel, but impact angel. That can give like 250,000. Yeah.
Impact. You said what? I'm sorry.
Impact angel, just to make. Not business angel, but impact angel.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much.